Is that on? Okay. Wow. How about that? It'll be even more awkward. Okay. So, small group, interrupt me at any time with any question that you would like to. And happy to make this more of a discussion. So I'm going to hit a few things, but really this is going to give you a little bit of an overview of how we're approaching user experience and performance at the Department of the Air Force. And this is something that we got serious about 3 years ago with the creation of my role, and we're still very serious about it today. In fact, as a priority, it's moved way up the line over the course of about the last 6 months. And that's a good thing, and it's starting to produce some results. And I think the next year looks very, very promising for progress. We'll talk about that. Another thing that I'll get to, make sure I don't forget it. I don't really have a slide on it, but this is breaking news. Is that we're starting to do some interesting collaboration with DoD CAPE, which is an organization I didn't even know existed. And I'm not a DoD person. I'll give my background in a minute. But what we're looking at is how do you take these kinds of tools and approaches and extend them across all of DoD as basically an umbrella of UX and performance monitoring to improve performance and UX of IT across the entire department. So, looking at this, if I were in the audience, looking at this from an Army perspective or a Fourth Estate perspective, or I don't know if there's anyone here from the Navy or the Marine Corps, this is very relevant to you because this is something that we are very serious about extending and even funding it at the DoD level. So my background, just real quick, I'm currently serving as Chief Experience Officer at the Department of the Air Force. It is a position we created 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago. I've been in the chair about 3 years and 2 months. And the purpose is to raise the bar on user experience and performance of enterprise IT and software across the entire department. So I work for the Chief Information Officer of the Department of the Air Force, Lauren Knausenberger, and it's a big, expansive scope, but I try to keep it focused. I keep the swim lane very, very narrow. So, I get requests all the time to do, fascinating and interesting things related to human factors and performance and so on. But if it's not kind of in a narrow swim lane, I sort of ignore it and move on. So, don't be offended. So I think you'll see my approach to things is very, very focused on tangible, measurable results. That's what I'm all about. My background, I came out of a digital agency that initially we were a practice area within Deloitte Consulting in the late 90s. We spun it out as a separate company called Round Arch in 2000. Worst time ever to start an internet-oriented consulting firm. And, grew from 75 people to 400 in less than a year, then shrank to 40 in less than a year, and somehow survived for about 2 more years. And ultimately, a group of 6 partners, including myself, had the opportunity to buy the company from Deloitte. We eventually, grew it 20% a year for about a decade and sold it to what's now Dentsu out of Tokyo. And but what we did and what my background is designing, implementing, operating digital products and services. So think, websites and mobile apps to reserve cars, watch movies, book travel, rooms on cruises, healthcare, health and wellness, all those kinds of things. So it's a mix of user experience and technology, and that's really what I continue to focus on today. So what is user experience and why do we care? I'm not going to make this a big treatise on user experience, but I will kind of start with this just to frame it. I occasionally get pushback. In fact, I get a lot of it in DoD about user experience. I was actually with a retired 2-star about a year ago. To be honest with you, I think he'd had a couple drinks. It was at a reception. And, I got chastised for about 30 minutes over, well, they can get to their email. So what is the problem? Tell me what is the problem. And, well, I'll tell you what the problem is. Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to show you what the problem is. So how are we doing? So some of you in the audience have heard of the infamous Fix My Computer memo. The good news is we'd been working on this for quite a while whenever this hit the fan. But we had an airman who frankly did me a great favor. I have not met with him yet, but I owe the guy probably at least a case of wine, because he helped highlight all the way to the SecAF level what we'd been saying for a long time and showing data to prove, which was that we had a huge gap in performance right out to the endpoint and of the software we're running up and down the board on NIPRNet, on CIPRNet, on everything. It was kind of a miserable user experience day to day for our users out in the field, wherever they are. And, so this was actually a big help to me. But that's not the only place that, you see this, right? You don't have to be we now have some fairly sophisticated ways of understanding how we're doing, but you don't have to be a genius, right? You can get in the right Facebook groups and Reddit groups and so on, and you're going to see a lot of, this kind of stuff, right? So it's kind of like, the problem everybody knows we have. And it's pretty obvious to anyone who's paying attention, and I'm not going to read through all of these. They crack me up. You have to have thick skin if you're in this line of work. This is my personal favorite, by the way. I thought this was genius. It's a whole long story about how General Nakasone had to convene a committee in order to open an Adobe file. But anyway, it's kind of funny. And this one, actually, somebody sent this to me, and I woke up one morning, and that was the first thing in my text messages. I thought it was actually a Twitter post from Elon Musk, and I thought, oh, man, that's awesome. So, it was fake, unfortunately. But, that's all just memes and crap on social media. But what's the real data? And the real data doesn't look very good. So I'll explain in a minute how we track this type of metric. But, what you're seeing in this, which you guys can read it, I'm not going to read it all to you, but what you're seeing in this is that there is a tremendous gap in airman and guardian perception of the IT tools that we give them versus what you see in the commercial sector. So this is a benchmark versus a data set of about 15,000 users. It's done annually by Forrester Group, something called the Business, or I think it's the Workforce Technographic Study. And we continue to do this kind of benchmarking just so we know where we stand. Any questions so far? And can I just ask this, is there anybody that sort of questions, like, whether or not we have a UX and performance issue? Like, all right, just if anyone wants to debate about it, talk, I'm happy to. So what are we doing to solve this? I would summarize it in 6 big things. And I will actually read this briefly, and then we're going to drill into each one for a couple minutes. First, closing gaps in roles, responsibilities, skills, processes, and tools. That's a huge umbrella of stuff. And we'll talk about that for a minute. Continue operational and tactical improvements to existing systems, right? We're not, it's not that we weren't doing anything before, right? We've been continuing to upgrade software and do the things that should be improving performance and keeping it up to date, but we have to continue to do that and accelerate it. By the way, can everybody hear okay? Yeah? All right. Address a whole bunch of technical debt, huge issue. Improve UX of the most widely used systems. This isn't just an enterprise IT issue. Whenever you read things like the Michael Kanan Fix Our Computers memo, which I would encourage everybody to go download, just Google Michael Kanan, K-A-N-A-A-N, Fix Our Computers, you'll find it. Be the first thing. But it's not just, the airmen concerns, guardian concerns are not just about enterprise IT. It's also about the software that they use all the time. And we'll come back to that in a few minutes. Address what I call the mega user journeys. We'll talk about that. Apply policy and guidance to reinforce all of the above. And we're working on that. We've got some interesting things that are in the pipeline. So close gaps in roles, responsibilities, process, et cetera. So, you can't do a presentation, and be credible from the Department of the Air Force without having an OODA loop. So this is my required use of the OODA loop. You knew it was coming, so there it is. But you know what? It applies, right, in this case. So how do we improve user experience and performance of IT? There is kind of an OODA loop that's necessary, right? You observe and you're tracking. You need to track performance. You need to know how well everything is running, whether you're talking about on the server, in the network, and cloud, at the endpoint. How does it run? How is performance at the glass as perceived by airmen and guardians while they're doing their job? Very important, and a big gap. So then orient, decide, and act. And I'm not going to explain the OODA loop. I guarantee you everybody in this room knows more about it than I do. So how do we do that? And I would argue that this is something we were just not doing until about a year ago. Not from a UX and performance perspective, we were not doing it until about a year ago. So we put in place 3 tools. The first one is on the right, and we launched this in January of 2020, Experience Management. And essentially what we're doing, we call it the Air Force IT Pulse, and it is a pulse survey. We send out 15,000 invitations every Monday morning to take a 3-question survey. And then the first 3, and there's several optional questions, but the first 3 questions are very simple. Where do you primarily work? And then it's like everywhere from totally on base to totally telework, and that's very important. We got to understand that, because that just telling us that tells us most of what we need to know about what you're using and how. And then the second one is, what is your overall impression of, how satisfied are you overall with enterprise IT, or with IT you use in work? Very important. The third question is, what is the primary reason for your response? So, where are you and how are you accessing? The second one is user satisfaction, or customer sat. And the third one is, what's the primary reason? Free text response. 66% of our respondents give us voluminous comments in the free text response, which we can mine using an AI feature on our survey platform. It is incredibly helpful. I don't know if I'm supposed to pose or not. So so that's the Air Force IT Pulse. Second thing that we started with was EPMS, Enterprise Performance Management System, and this is, oh, by the way, Air Force IT Pulse. I don't know if I'm supposed to say vendor names in here, but I'm going to, because it tells you what we're actually doing. Experience management is on a platform called Qualtrics. It's the dominant, probably the most widely used big survey research platform in the world today. There are others that are very, very good. This is one of them, and that's what we use. And for EPMS, essentially what it is, it's on 50 bases today. We're going to about 80 by the fall. And what we do is, when we come to a base, we install. We're now installing 4 NetScout boxes, and 2 of them on Nipper, 2 on Sipper, 1 at the router at the base boundary, and then 1 at a location far away from the router as we can get, but somewhere on base. And then all of these NetScout boxes are running a standard set of tests. And they're hitting the servers and services around the department that we care about the most, and some of the DISA things, right? So they're going out and checking OCSP, all of these things. So can they get to the PKI infrastructure? Because if that slows down, it slows down everything. I had it explained to me at one point that, the PKI infrastructure is like the force that binds the universe together. And if that thing slows down, everything runs horribly. So it does all of these tests at a regular scheduled interval, and then all of the data gets returned to a server that we can track it all on, base by base, router by router, box by box, and service by service, and know exactly where we stand. So if, for example, if all of a sudden we lose access to, the Microsoft cloud and the M365 or O365 stuff, if something like that happens, we know what happened, right? We know that, it's because we can figure out quite quickly, it's not Microsoft, it's in the JRSS stack or something like that. We can figure those kinds of things out pretty quickly. Yeah.
Quick question. Is the test synthetic, or is it like you're actually service calling the service?
It's a mix of both. So it's mostly service call type stuff now. Like, for example, we do upload and download like 10 files, stuff like that, right? To Cloud One, and then I think a service call to the OCSP server at DISA, stuff like that. But what we're starting to do, and actually what the Navy has done, I'll talk more about what the other services are doing. The Navy actually already uses, so on NetScout you can put the Selenium browser and then write scripts so you can do synthetic transaction monitoring. And we're going to start doing that because that way we can go check Teams, and we can log in, open up a Teams meeting, check a Teams call. You see where I'm going with this. Exactly. And because a lot of the issues we run into from a performance and UX perspective are things like, people getting thrown out of Teams meetings and stuff like that. So now we need to know, and then we won't be totally dependent on Microsoft and their metrics. Like, I want my own independent metrics that are objective of all of this stuff, right? So that's EPMS. And like I said, we're on about 50 bases now. We're trying to get to 80 by the fall. And then the last piece is, and we began this last summer. We funded it initially with COVID-19 funds, then we funded it with SBIR funds. We're still trying to work out how this works going forward. But it's digital experience monitoring, and for that we're using Eternity. And there's really only a handful of digital experience monitoring products that are agent-based that you can install on a private cloud or a private, on-prem. This is one of them that we happen to already have in-house. And we are now on about 6,500 endpoints spread across the 65 largest bases. So it's kind of thin. We're trying to ramp that to about 25,000. The Navy has it on a few hundred endpoints. My understanding is they're planning to ramp it to like 200,000. I don't have all the latest data. Some of the Riverbed guys here probably know the latest. But what this does for us, is anybody familiar with how digital experience monitoring works or real user monitoring? Yes. So essentially what we're doing is, because you have an agent on the client, it's going to track everything that's happening, not everything, but performance-wise from the operating system, the applications, even what's going on in the browser. So I can see the performance of all the client applications. I can see their availability. I can see when they crash. All right down to like the service level, component level, all of it, right? Same thing with web applications. So for all of our web-based applications, I mean everything from the fitness app to the personnel apps to anything else that's accessed via the browsers, I can see performance of those too. And then we're in the process of doing an upgrade to the latest version of Eternity that's going to even allow us additional flexibility and capability to be able to get more data, particularly about the web apps, but also about the client apps. So, what do we do with this data? I'll talk more about it. Well, actually, I'll talk about it right now. So, for example, by the way, most of this data is CUI. I would love to show you a whole bunch of charts. Frankly, I would love to do a demo. I've got accounts on all this, and I'm in there practically every day on all of these systems, but, it's CUI. So, some carefully disguised things so you can get a sense of kind of what it is. But what you're looking at are two different charts out of Eternity just to explain what we're doing with it. On the right is kind of like an A/B test. So we're in the process of converting from, I forget, you guys probably know better, the different versions of Outlook and O365, but we're in the process of converting to the newest O365. And, we call them rings, basically. I am not a Microsoft systems admin person, obviously, but we deploy by rings. And so, we put it on like 1% of machines, and then 3, and then up to 10. So whenever we had it out on a small number of machines, we were looking because we were trying to figure out, the security people are going to be all over, is this going to meet all of our security requirements as it goes out, and are we having issues or whatever. But we wanted to know, how does it perform relative to what we had before, right? And that's the chart that you see on the right. That is a comparison. On the right side is the older version, on the left is the newer version. And for a subset of machines, you can see a direct comparison of what they call the user experience index, Eternity. It's an Eternity proprietary metric that just is kind of a function of response time, crashes, various things, right? It's about 5 different things that go into it, but it gives you a good sense of what's the overall health of user experience of the software. So you can see significantly better user experience just by doing the upgrade. So from an upgrade perspective, you're like, great, you guys should move forward, proceed. We support rolling this thing out across 100% of our endpoints. But you know what? If it came back and software wasn't going to perform on our networks, we would be calling halt. And we do call halt sometimes. And the fact that we've done this on a small subset and now we know what to expect, it helps us keep an eye out to make sure that we're on track with the rollout. And to be honest with you, so far, now we gave the green light. They've started rolling it out across the entire department, and we're not seeing the expected upgrade benefit in User Experience Index. As of right now, we're actually not seeing it move as much as we expected. So why not? Something's going on, right? So we're working those issues. So if you look at the left, those are a similar way of depicting the same data, but those are the various different versions of Outlook. And the one at the upper left is giving the best user experience index, and the one that's red is the lowest user experience index. It just goes to show there's a whole lot of different versions of things out there, and it shows you which ones we should be migrating to get the best performance. But that's the typical kind of stuff we do. Whenever you talk about enterprise performance management system and the data we get from NetScout, it's a little hard to understand this, but what you're seeing is it's almost a continuous date range across the top chart and then down to the bottom chart. There's a gap in time there in the middle just to make it easier to fit on one page. But that's one base, I won't say which, and everything's plugging along kind of normally, and then all of a sudden that red line, squiggly line there kind of goes higher and gets a lot more variable. But what happened was that base was not on a particular JRSS stack, and then all of a sudden got put on it for the first time. And nobody knew quite why or what to expect or whatever, and didn't look good. Turns out there was an issue that needed to be resolved by a supplier, another government agency. And eventually when they got that figured out, and by the way, they didn't see it. We saw the effect of this, right? Because we saw the change in data. And so we could call them up and start helping them figure it out. And once they had it all figured out, changes made, yada, yada, yada. You can see on the bottom chart what happened. It went right back down to normal. So this is the kind of stuff. So proactive monitoring of performance and user experience, and then being able to respond to that and be able to drive, rollouts and upgrades and yada, yada, yada. Any other questions on how we use the data? Yes. Yeah. No question. So we've done multiple studies, and I see this data all the time. If you really break down what are the biggest factors in determining performance of an endpoint in our environment, if you ask people a few years ago, they would all just kind of say, well, it's the network. It's our bad network. It's not the network. My ITAS, we call it EDC laptop, operates as well on our network, at least on VPN, as my personal MacBook operates on my home network with no VPN or anything else. I don't believe, based on the data that I see, even though we encounter issues like I just talked about here, I do not think fundamentally we have a network problem. We have an endpoint problem. And so the biggest factors in the endpoint are, first of all, the hardware itself, number one. We have about 50% of our machines have a spinning disk drive, not capable of running, our fairly heavy endpoint security stack very well. So that's a huge issue. Number two would be endpoint security, like you mentioned. There's a lot of room to improve, and one of the issues that we face is that I don't think our configuration management is the best, because there's a whole bunch of different organizations that have the ability to make changes that affect how this stuff runs. And so stuff gets out of whack. Things that we thought we had, addressed and improved performance a year or two ago, I find out have changed back, and we had no idea. And that's why you have to track it all the time. Number 3, I would say, is sort of a combination of what we call core services. So it's the Active Directory stuff. It's DNS and all of those things, PKI infrastructure. All of that stuff can really slow you down, in terms of UX and performance. Huge factor. And what we find is that a lot of those things in our environment are undersized, and the pipes to them are not nearly as good as they should be. Back to it. I do not believe, based on the data that I see all the time, that we have a big wide area network problem. We have a lot of things to do to optimize it on an ongoing basis, but that's achievable. I think our biggest issue are the things I just mentioned. Yeah, and the hardware is a huge deal. I mean, it's a huge deal. We'll talk more about that. Continue operational, tactical. No, I got to go a little faster. I'm not going to read through all of these bullets, but sort of the bottom line is that there's a whole string of things that we are constantly working on to improve. They're in the kind of the right column on the right side of the page. On the left side of the page, the overall theme is putting in place the processes and people and tools to resolve things before our users see them or experience them. We're also spending a lot of time right now addressing stability of cloud-based services. We have services that we use all the time that are very important, that we find very unstable, and I think it used to be unclear. You get into sort of the vendor finger pointing and all that kind of thing. But with the data we have now, it's pretty easy to figure out, well, it's maybe not that vendor. It's maybe somewhere, kind of in our, sort of DISA, JRSS, and other related things. You know what I'm saying? So we're working those things pretty aggressively. And the other components are too. So we're talking with them about what they've done to resolve similar issues and work in those avenues. Operationalizing all of the above is critical. And then here's another one, clarifying ASIC. So our lead command for enterprise IT is Air Combat Command. And one of the things that has been very important, and I don't know that it's still completely percolated through into how everyone's doing business, but I'm hoping we'll get there. But, I think they have been approaching, their role as more, to defend the network and just sort of keep it up. But that's not sufficient, right? It's got to perform to a level that supports our mission for, for NIPR, for SIPR. So just keeping it secure is not sufficient, and we have to make that clear, and we've clarified that. Address technical debt. So this is real data from inside our environment. On the left would be latency, and on the right is user-perceived lost productivity. So on our Air Force IT Pulse survey, we have an optional question: how much time? It's basically how much time do you think you lose? How much productivity do you lose a week due to IT issues? And it's an interesting range, and we can stratify that by job function, by location, and start to relate it to mission, which gets very interesting. But in here, we're just relating it to hardware. And notice the, obviously sloping, chart as you increase from a spinning disk to a hard drive to whatever they are, NVMe hard drive, and then on the right, same thing. So no surprise, increase, improve the hardware, get better performance, duh. But you also get a significantly more productive airman or guardian. Yes?
So a lot of what you have is listed as patent. What's the percentage of Cloud One APM versus physical?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Because one's more localized to the LAN or the WAN,
Yeah.
the other's cloud-based. So, I mean, how much of the applications are you monitoring on Cloud 1
Oh. Great question. So we are not doing application performance monitoring as far as what I'm doing. I would love to be, and I think Cloud One needs an APM approach, but they don't have one right now. They should. So we are monitoring performance of Cloud One applications, but only to the extent as experienced at the browser, or at the client by the airman at the glass. Okay, but that doesn't tell you that you know what that tells you, right? But it's not a sufficient level of monitoring to really manage the cloud-based services. So the reason I'm showing this chart is that this is one of a number of charts that we use to speak with, what we call the glass doors, right? Which is the, most senior leaders in the department. And I think they understand the situation. So this is just a quote from Secretary Kendall's August 1 memo to the department, so just a few days ago. You can skim down to the bottom part. As a result, we have been able to make a significant down payment to improve our IT and cyber posture, in other words, to fix our computers, a direct reference to the letter to the Air Force, right? And so I'm not the right person to go through, all of the details on what we've done with the POM and funding and so on, but I just want to say, right at the secretary level and through the POM process, we are getting after this, and we are figuring out how to go after our tech debt. So improve UX of the most widely used systems. So this is not just an enterprise IT issue, like I said before. Airmen, if you put tools in front of people that are just obviously not as good as they should be, that kind of affects your psyche a little bit. You know what I mean? And this is one of the most egregious examples of it. And thankfully, we retired this about a year ago. But this was in production for about 6 years. And if anybody here is familiar with it, if you were in the Air Force, it's our former fitness app. And, the vast majority of users of this app are there for one reason and one reason only. It's to find out, it's to, get a little report on how they scored on the fitness test on all the different numbers last year or last time they took it or the last couple times, and then do a calculation to figure out what they need to score next time in order to make sure they pass, right? It's the only reason they go. Now, if you're a fitness, trainer, if you're a tester or whatever, there's some other use cases, but the vast majority of people, that's the only reason they go. Well, it turns out that little report is buried at the bottom of this navigation structure that you have to mouse over all the way down to the bottom. And if you probably can't see from back in the back seats, but none of these navigation options even logically sound like what you'd expect. Like one of them is like USAF links. I mean, why would I choose USAF links to go get a fitness report? It makes no sense. So, but that's just an example of bad UX, and I'm not going to teach a class on how to design the information architecture of a website, okay? But if I was teaching a class on how to design the information architecture of a website, this violates basically everything, right? That one report, really, if you were designing this in a user-centric way, you would basically log in, you would authenticate, and you would land on that information, right? That's, I log into Delta Airlines. It tells me my next flight and how many points I have and what my status is. It's like instantly all about me, right? That's what you want. All right. Shouldn't have gotten started on that one. So one of the things when I stepped into this role is start gathering feedback, and within a few months put together something called the CXO's 10 Most Wanted. So these are the applications that, based on airman feedback, are the most egregiously bad user experience of widely used software in the department, all right? And if you know anything about the Air Force, A1 is the personnel area, right? ATC is Air Education Training Command. There's one on the DISA list here. Air Force Reserve Command has a couple, and then one of them is in the IT community, actually. And but, you know, as you can see and look at the users, those are rough user numbers. You know, these are the things that people use all the time, right? Well, I take that back. They don't use them all the time, but they're used by almost everybody, right? They're used by huge audiences across the department. Often they're not used very often, like that fitness app's only used a couple times a year, but because everybody uses it, if you want to, you know, my job, like I said at the very beginning when I was introducing myself, my job is about raising the bar of user experience across the entire department. So I got to go touch that stuff that affects everybody, right? So we're doing that, and the good news is 2 of these out of the top 10 have already been redesigned and replaced, and continue to be worked. They're not going to be just, you know, replaced and then not touched anymore. They're going to continue to be worked. There's 6 more that are in process of being replaced or redesigned. There's 1 that will get replaced, the very bottom one will get replaced by the ITAS program. And then the DISA one, we are continuing to use for now, and then the AROS-R, which, by the way, is probably the most derided system in the entire department, I think, as of right now, I know of no plans to redesign or upgrade it or anything else. I have seen a redesign that was done by Kessel Run. They came up with a prototype, but that one we got to figure out what to do with. So, and by the way, the DISA one, I have to use that one myself. I would love to have I've attempted to have a conversation with DISA to see what we can do about it, but it's miserable. So there are things we can do about this. So I needed a way to apply a simple usability testing technique to systems and then help use that data to push on the programs and push on the communities that own them. So I teamed up with the Squadron Officer School, and they have been great. Every cohort that comes in, you know, they have these optional projects, and one of the project options is to work with me to do a series of usability-related studies on systems. They pick the system they want to do, and one of the things they do is calculate. It's a very standard way of doing it, something called System Usability Score, or SUS. And there's SUSs calculated all over the place. I mean, thousands and thousands you can go benchmark to. It's a little 10-question survey of a certain number of people that use the system in different roles. It's a very specific way of doing it. It's a very academic, wonky technique, to be honest. You're not going to see it after you rent a car or whatever. But it's a good approach because it allows us to do an apples-to-apples comparison of usability across a wide variety of different, systems. And it's helping us actually highlight problems and then move them, so that we can retest them and get a better result. And mega journeys, we're almost done. And I think that, our brethren at the Army can appreciate this too. The goal, when I talk about mega journeys, what I mean is there are certain user journeys that affect practically everybody in the department. And they're just prolific, and often they're not even talked about that much, right? So PCSing, it's like oxygen. We don't even think about it in DoD, really, right? We just assume that you're going to have to go to a million different locations and wait in a bazillion lines and print out 25 copies of your orders, and that all the furniture is going to get dented, dinged, and damaged no matter how much bubble wrap gets applied, and stuff's going to get lost, and they're going to mess up the reimbursements, and then you're going to be fighting with them over that for 6 months. I mean, all this stuff just sort of assumed that, but in reality, it does not have to be that way. And so we have an innovation process under the Vice Chief of the Air Force. It's called the Momentum Fund. Squadron officers across the department voted on what they would like to see the most to use that money on. And the Vice Chief allocated about $3 million, actually slightly less, for us to go do a prototype mobile app to assist with PCSing. And we built it on the A1s, so the personnel. They have a customer relationship management system at their core to manage all that workflow for personnel. We built it on top of that, and we are about to go live. You're going to authenticate with Okta. It is a native mobile app built in React Native, and it talks to Salesforce and other systems through that, and essentially helps an airman manage that whole process of PCSing, so in and out processing. And the plan is to pilot it on 4 bases this fall, and then we figure out when it's right to roll it out. And then last, Policy. We have some policy in the works. So UX acquisition is an interesting one. I talk to people, contractors, vendors, some of whom in this room, all the time, who say, Colt, we all agree user experience is super important, but the problem is, how am I supposed to propose, a great UX approach if it's not in the RFP and it's not part of the evaluation criteria? Because I'm just going to lose because it's going to drive up the cost of my proposal, right? That's totally fair. Valid point. So how do we get user experience and performance baked into our acquisitions so that you now have, the best of UX talent and performance and those capabilities rising to the top as we, select vendors, right? Totally reasonable request. So in response to people I know and the vendors, and keep in mind, I came from the contractor vendor, industry community. We're putting something together, and I think my boss will sign it. I think she's very supportive of it. And then on the software application user experience side, we're actually late to the game. So NGA has done a great job. The CIO of NGA about a year or two ago signed a policy that does several things. It requires use of a common design system for all software development. There's 3 design systems at NGA, one for public-facing sites, one for SharePoint sites, and then one for essentially every other application. And that's brilliant, right? And I think we use some design systems within the Air Force, but not consistently and not everywhere we should be. Kessel Run has used Google's Material UI, added some things onto it they need, info security banners at the top and bottom, stuff like that, and they're having great results with it. And so now what we want to do is take those things that NGA did and actually expand that across the department and make it a requirement as part of every software development project. So it would be design system, feedback, web analytics, and and making sure that users are involved in the process. Essentially, you're doing user-centered design. And that would be not only for new projects, that would be for sustainment of existing systems. So those are the things we have in the works in policy. And then results, I'm going to be real quick. So I mentioned my survey several times. We launched January 2000, not 2000, what am I saying? January 2020, and just before COVID hit, and we were sitting at about 21% user satisfaction. That's pretty bad. We go through the COVID months, and look what happened, right? We more than doubled, in fact, got up to about 51, 52, somewhere in that range. Well, why? What happened? So, first of all, user experience of people that are teleworking and on the VPN is 2x UX of people that are working on base. 2x. Why is that? You access all of our services faster over the VPN than you do on base. Something we have to fix. We're working on that. And that has more to do with core services than it does the wide area network, but that's a longer conversation. So we transitioned to telework. We massively, increased VPN capacity. We launched CVR, right? I mean, you guys know what CVR is, right? We were doing great. We kind of bump along in about the high 40s range. Then we start drifting down. And we went on this long drift down. You'll see a couple gaps in my data for operational reasons having to do with the survey office. But we went on this long drift down, we were just fighting a lot of headwinds, right? We retired CVR, which was very popular, right? Think about CVR, right? You can pretty much do your job, but now on your personal device, right? It was a big loss from a user experience perspective. Made everybody happy to have it. Made you tremendously more flexible in your role. And so the good news is that since about Thanksgiving of last year, we have been on a slow, steady upward trend, and it continues to this day. We're about 15 points higher. We're starting to get back to where we were in our peak post-COVID. Now, what's driving that? Well, we've been very, very focused. We've been focused on replacing old hardware. We've been focused on, all of the types of issues that I've been talking about here, and we think it's starting to add up. This basically just says what are the topics that are concerned airmen, and we're improving on some of the key ones. And I mentioned earlier that I am using one of the ITAS EDC devices, and that user satisfaction of it is significantly better. So if user satisfaction with the devices is in like the 70-80% range. User satisfaction with overall IT for people with the new ITAS device is about 2x what it was at the time, versus the rest of the Air Force. And latency is dramatically better. So the point of this slide is just to say we can actually do this. We have 20,000 of these deployed, plus or minus, today on, I believe, 9 bases. So this can be done, and we're actually doing it. And then the last thing I'm going to say is, what are some other opportunities? I'm just going to mention one to improve user experience across the department. This is so obvious, but we're not doing enough, in my opinion. So user satisfaction with IT support and help desk ranges about 3x, actually a little bit over 3x from bottom to top. We have bases where it's in the teens, and we have one base where it's about 70, and several where it's in the 60s. And these are not all just small bases at the outliers. A couple of those that are up in the 60s are very large bases. So what does that say, right? It says, first of all, we can do this. We can actually deliver pretty solid, customer satisfaction with IT service and support and help desk in our environment. It is possible to do. It is also possible for it to be miserable. So, if you look at this chart, it seems obvious, right? I mean, I'm a former management consultant. You figure out what the people are doing over at the left, and then you go do that over at the right. I mean, this is not a complicated thing. And now there are complications, right? Because if it turns out that this is basically exactly correlated with, like, say, the tech refresh on the hardware, then maybe your IT service and support is just almost, it's essentially a function of the hardware you have on base. And to a degree, that is true, but not totally. So there are things that can be done with service and support that can move the curve up. And that's really all I've got.
Yeah, I was going to just ask a question to the point you just made. The Apple Store experience, is some of those bases bring that kind of service to the users where you can go in, they spot, your hard drive plays, kind of things that give you the sense that the sentiment of the user is such that, I'm being serviced in that one.
So I think it varies. And to be honest with you, I get on base service and support, I get a little bit out of my knowledge because I haven't seen that many bases. I've seen enough and I've talked to enough people that I get a pretty good idea. So we have bases where, if you kind of are on a first name basis with your IT support people, user satisfaction for those people is great, right? But if you're on a base where you don't have that and where you have to make an appointment and go in and it's 3 days later, and by that point you've lost 3 days of productivity and life is, horrible, and, very different perception. But specifically to your question, like, is there sort of like an Apple Genius Bar kind of environment? Keep in mind that with the Genius Bar even, I find them frustrating because usually you got to book them like 5 days out or 3 or whatever, and it's never at a time I can go. So, but anyway, I do like them. Don't get me wrong. I'm an Apple guy all the way. But that is part of the vision for the ITAS program. And so as that rolls out, that is one of the things that they can offer is sort of that kind of environment, sort of an internet cafe, Genius Bar kind of environment where you can show up and get a problem resolved, ideally quickly. Yes?
Why do I still today have to type www..
That was a good question. I don't know. That seems like something we maybe can change. I don't know. Yeah, any other questions? Yep.
Do the other branches have user experience initiatives as well?
Yeah, good question. So the question was, do the other branches have a similar initiative in UX and performance? And there's nothing quite like what we're doing. However, the Navy in particular is doing a lot of the same things. In fact, they got their ATO for NetScout and Eternity faster than we did. So I would say, in terms of what they're doing, they're probably kind of on parity with us. Do they have a person with my title? No. but they do have people. I would point you to, say, the CTO, Lewis Copland, as kind of a coordinator of that activity at the Navy, and there's others. At the Army, I'm not aware of these initiatives going on. That's actually part of the reason why I wanted to come down here, is just to kind of get a little closer to the Army. And the last thing I'll say on the topic is, and I mentioned this while some people were still walking in the room, we're actually working with DoD CAPE, which is kind of like a, I don't know what to call them. I guess you would say it's sort of an audit group, but they look for synergies and initiatives and cost savings and things like that across the department. So they are in the process of doing a project to look at performance and security and what kind of synergies can be found across the entire department. And this is very interesting to them. So what I am hoping to see, it's my opinion, what I'm hoping to see come out of that exercise is, let's take some of these same types of services and let's apply them DoD-wide, fund them DoD-wide, operate them consistently DoD-wide, and essentially have what I call the JD power of performance and UX across the entire department. And think about that. I mean, if we had that, right, if you could literally, have a PowerPoint slide somewhere in the Pentagon and people could say, okay, wait a minute, so who has the best performing computers? Well, it's those guys. Then we all want that, right? Makes sense. But right now, it's hard to do those kind of apples-to-apples comparisons, and there's not that level of transparency across the department. And so that's where we need to go. No, that doesn't exist yet at the DoD level. I think it should. There are some groups within DoD that are kind of doing similar related things. Not similar. They're doing things connected to human factors and human systems integration under like the research and development areas of DoD. You know what I'm saying? But if you're talking specifically UX and performance of enterprise IT and software, there really is not, that I am aware of, a coordinator at the DoD level, like myself. Yes?
What is the ITAS device?
The ITAS device? It is, they call it the EDC. It's the ITAS desktop configuration, and it's their answer to the Air Force standard desktop configuration. So it's not a device per se. It's their image, their standard image that they deploy on their devices. It runs pretty darn well. It's not perfect because they do face some of the same constraints that we do, but at the enterprise level. But they've got 20,000 of them out there, and like I said, user satisfaction on the device, on the EDC, solid. If it were a product, it'd be a hit. And it kind of is a product. Anything else? I think we're out of time. But let me put it this way. I've got no place to go, so if anybody wants to stay and ask questions.
Just one last. The gentleman that asked the question, the DAP reference you made is definitely inclusive on APM. So is there a plan to bring APM to the DAP?
Oh, you're saying digital experience monitoring is inclusive of APM? So it's a great question. So what I would say is it's kind of different buyers a little bit. So remember I said earlier I keep my swim lane fairly narrow? So would I love to see APM like on Cloud One and Platform One and Advana and all of these kind of DoD? Of course, absolutely, totally supportive of it. Do the products have other products that do that? Sure. But our digital experience monitoring product is not an APM product. You know what I mean? And that's typical, right? A DEM product typically doesn't do APM stuff and vice versa.
Yeah, I see them as modular components.
Yes.
From a scoring perspective, in terms of overall user experience,
Yeah.
the user is going somewhere. And that's how I
Yeah.
the ability to reference that scoring.
By the way, if anybody wants a DAF UX hashtag sticker, that says "Make it work, make it fast," got them right down here. Anything else? Okay. Thanks. Have a good show.